Edward Day, how you doing?
Jason, doing really well. How about yourself?
Good to see you. We're here with Edward Day, who's the Chief Preservation Officer for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And Edward, I believe you said that, in conversation, you don't mind if I call you Ed. I'd like maybe you just tell folks who you are and where you're at, and I'll let you kind of work through your job description because I don't want to butcher that.
Well, Jason, you can call me anything you want. Ed's
Okay.
good. We have roots that go way back when you were at the City of Bowie Museums, and I was I don't know, relatively new working for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
took over at Riversdale 1994, which sounds, it's a different century.
And I hope we get into Riversdale because that place was, I mean, everybody was kind of talking about what you were doing there. I'm sure we'll get into it.
Oh, I think it's a big part of that story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, everything that I did at Riversdale just carried over into this new position. And I
Mhm.
try to, bring to the fore what I learned there. But I started in 94 and it was kind of a career change for me. And, I was kind of an entrepreneurial guy. I have a background in music and history and all kinds of crazy stuff. So
Hmm.
I try to bring that in, try to be inclusive, make it interesting.
Yeah. Where did you go to school or, yeah.
Well, I'm a native Marylander. I went to the University of Maryland. Before there was a historic preservation degree there, there was a fledgling program, certificate program. And so I went to Maryland undergraduate and then worked with David Fogel, who was the original preservation guru at Maryland.
Mhm.
He stuck to it like George Washington. He just wasn't going to give up. And finally, they recognized that he became the chair in the preservation department. And, you know, it became a formal program. And now I'm proud to have come from, the roots of that.
Mhm.
David refers to me, he's still around, by the way, living in Annapolis, as one of
Mhm.
his first students, although I think that there were a lot more students before me. But it was a really great thing, and I learned a lot from him. One of the things about David Fogel was his ability to get people together and build consensus and get things moving forward. He was also a practitioner of the stone soup theory, where everybody brings something to
Mhm.
the dance, and then you stir it together and you've got a product. It was really kind of an amazing thing, and he always did it with good humor. It was never too technical,
Mhm.
and it was accessible. Made it relevant for people, which I think is key in museums and stuff too.
Yeah. So when you after that time with him, I mean, you went on, where did you go from there?
Well, as a student over there, I had done a couple of programs or assisted at Riversdale within the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and they had a history division that was led by a really great gentleman. His name was John Walton. John Walton's father was a fairly well-known architect and was associated with a lot of different things around here, whether it was residential buildings, and I think he might have even had something to do with the sort of famous UFO entryway at the old Prince George's Library over in Hyattsville. But John was the head of the history division, and I worked with him and I before, and then I was looking to sort of get into the career, the field. I really was looking more preservation, but they had this part-time job opening at Riversdale, and I thought, well, you got to start somewhere. Everybody needs to, you just can't come walking in and, have those that golden parachute right away. You got to pay your dues. I always felt that way, whether it was music or whatever.
Mhm.
And I took a part-time job with the Park and Planning Commission managing Riversdale. And, it was like a $7 an hour job back in 1994. It was nothing to it. But I saw the growth potential. I mean, the facility was just finishing the restoration, the structural restoration. They hadn't done any real interpretation there. The walls are pretty much all painted white.
Mhm.
And it just gave me an opportunity to come in and grow it, develop programming. It was a pretty exciting time.
You were so chief cook and bottle washer? Were there any
Yeah.
other part-time staff there or curators or anything?
Yeah, no, there was nothing. I mean, literally nothing. What I was able to do, I had no budget. I basically had $1,200 a year to run the place. I mean, literally. That, in addition to my salary and everything. And we work for an organization where the utilities are paid, so I didn't have to really worry about that. But I had no staff. And there was a gentleman who was retirement age who just happened to be in one of my historic preservation classes at Maryland. He was going back on a seniors program up there, just kind of auditing classes. He'd already had degrees, raised a family and everything, and worked for the government. His name was Pat Miller. And Pat came in and he became what we call weekend manager. And what I would do is, if we rented the facility, I was able to take the money that realized from the rental, put it into an account, which was part of a self-sustaining account, a restoration fund. And I actually started paying people out of that account. So he was my first staff person. And, you've always got to lead, by the front. And so I wanted to put a lot of programs out quickly and show people what we were able to do at the site. The other thing I had going for me is we had a really great friends group, the Riversdale Historical Society, which was a 501c3 organization. The president of the friends group at the time was also the mayor of the town. And that was kind of interesting because she had some ideas about the way she wanted things to go. And she was a very, strong-willed person. She was hard-bitten, had been a legal secretary in her career. She actually got into historic preservation, but got into the town by getting into historic preservation. Riversdale had a compelling story and it was falling into disrepair. This is years before I got there, back in the 1960s. And she led a group that would ultimately lobby for enough money to get that facility restored. So you can see, coming in, I had somebody who had a full head of steam, and I could have easily been summarily executed coming in. There were three managers in front of me that didn't last more than a year. So it didn't look good when I stepped in the door from that aspect of politics. But I think that, my management training was all about, look, how do we work together? What would you like to see accomplished? And so we did that, and it just happened to be a tricentennial year for the county. I don't know if you were in it, Bowie, at the time, but 1996 was the tricentennial, and we had to come up with a year's worth of really, every month a new program, new exhibit or something. And so I worked with the Historical Society and my part-time person, Pat Miller, and we just really built it up. We basically started from nada. There was nothing.
Wow. So tell folks who are listening, just like kind of the elevator spiel of Riversdale, kind of maybe the architecture a little bit, like a snapshot of the family.
Yeah, well, it was associated, and people knew about it in the county and, in the state, because it was associated with the Calvert family, but it had a history that made it really unique. And that was before the Calvert family.
Okay.
It was actually built by a gentleman named Henri Joseph Stier, who was an immigrant from a refugee, really, from what is now Belgium. He was from Flanders. And what had happened was the French Revolution came into play, and there was all kinds of violence and strife, and the guillotines and, everything that was nasty. And when the French finished basically shooting themselves in the foot, they decided they wanted to import that brand of chaos to the surrounding countries, and the Low Countries were invaded ultimately by the French Revolutionary armies. And so the Stier family was living in Belgium, Antwerp at the time, left to come to the United States. And this is the late 1700s, 1790s. And they landed in Philadelphia. They lived at the Paca House for a while in Annapolis, and then they bought some property in Riverdale, what they call Riverdale now. And they started building this structure. And it's called Riverdale because Mr. Stier called it Riversdale. And that's the beginning of the story. His daughter, when they were living in Annapolis, met and fell in love with George Calvert, who was a great grandson of the 5th Lord Baltimore. And they got married, and at that point, Napoleon had come to power in Europe and was issuing amnesties for all the people that left. You can come back, you can get your civil rights back, you can get your property back, but you have to bring money because I'm going to tax you, that kind of situation. So the Stier family, they all went back except for Rosalie, who was married to this American, George Calvert. And what that started was a series of letters, correspondence going back and forth across the Atlantic for nearly 20 years. And that was really one of the most compelling things about Riversdale, that absolute, look into somebody's mind who is the early 19th century, who's marooned here like Gilligan's Island, except, she's in a foreign country. She's married to an American. It really should be a movie, honestly. And so a gal named Margaret Law Calcott, whose husband George was the chair of history at Maryland for a while back in the 60s and 70s, found the letters and started crafting a narrative, crafting a book together. And you got this unbelievable insight into somebody who's living here in the early federal period. It's unbelievably compelling.
Is that Mistress?
Yes, it's Mistress of Riversdale, Johns Hopkins University Press. It's an unbelievable read. I actually read it before I started working here, which is kind of interesting, or working there. It was really kind of interesting. The other thing about it, not only is the story great, but the architecture is unbelievable. We had the Vernacular Architecture Forum in town, which is a nationally known group that travels to different cities. And they were here in 2018, and they were just blown away by the architecture. It was pretty influential, neoclassical 5-part Palladian plan. It has a hallway, sort of a transverse hallway that runs east and west, and it's sited north-south, so it gets nice sun all day long. And it's not Georgian; it's really early federal. So the fenestration, there's lots of windows and light. It's a really beautiful place. Look, Tudor Place in Georgetown copied a lot of the plan. They had 2 pavilions. They weren't sure what they were going to do with the main block of the house, and they came to Riversdale and they go, "Oh, this is great. Let's do it." So they were all friends back then. That elite society. But it's stucco over brick. It's pretty memorable if you ever go there. But I think that's one of the neatest things about it.
So how were you able to use your background and expertise in kind of the preservation side of things to flesh out the story there of Rosalie because I think that's one thing that it's interesting in our field. Like, you have a curator who is looking at objects, or you have a historian, and and that's all good, but I'd just love to hear your perspective on someone with kind of that preservation lens. Like, how did you tackle telling the story, which is really what is compelling for people, for visitors? And
well, we had ongoing programs to interpret the interior spaces, and interpretive period was basically we identified that, which you have to do in any situation. What's your mission statement? What are your goals? What's going to support that? And so our interpretive period, which was blessed by the Maryland Historical Trust, was Rosalie's lifetime, basically. So it was built in 1801. It was finished in 1807. Mr. Steer, Rosalie's father, goes back to Europe in 1803. We have a lot of information about how she was decorating the house, what she was doing. So that's falling right into what you asked me. So I had a lot of interpretation to do, which is, just an outgrowth of preservation. We work with Matthew Mosca to get authentic paint colors and things like that. He's a finishes consultant. And, we work through it that way. And then, but the other thing, there's an entrepreneurial side. A lot of people want to, for some reason, and I think that this has changed, but back when I started there like 27 years ago, you'd close off a room. You wouldn't show people what was going on behind the scenes. It was kind of dusty, and you wanted to keep people away from it. But we found out that, and this is, again, I'm sure pretty accepted nowadays widely, you show people what's going on. You don't have to cloister that kind of work off. They're very interested. And whether that's interpretation on the inside of the house, whether it's brick repointing on the exterior, whether it's even archaeology, they like to see open pits. What are you doing? They're very curious. People are drawn to this in the same way we are drawn to this as a profession.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Did you have places there where people were working on the architecture that people could see it ongoing?
Oh, it's ongoing. It's analogous. I talk about historic preservation to folks in my field. It's analogous to the Golden Gate Bridge. When I was a kid, I found it fascinating that it took them so much time to paint the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco that by the time they started and finished, they had to start again.
Yeah.
That was the maintenance cycle, and so there's always something going on. I had pretty much a blank canvas when I came into Riversdale. There wasn't a lot that had been interpreted at that point. So, how do you get the colors, those wonderful, vibrant, early federal period colors where we started getting wealth in this country and they were able to spend money on the decorative arts. And so that it's all part of it. And, that whole pursuit of knowledge and, working with the paint studies guy, they would come in and take little samples and go back and they'd encase it in acrylic resin and slice it and put it under a scanning cross section, microscope situation. And and I'm getting all those terms wrong, but bear with me. And, you see the strata of the colors and it's just an amazing moment. It's like, that's the one in that time period that would have been on the walls. And so, you just make it kind of part of what people kind of visit there. And we would always, do lectures always followed by, it was always a social thing, whether we had wine and cheese or ice cream, it really didn't matter. People like to get out and then they like to talk about it afterwards. We always felt like that coming together was really important and actually would bring me money later on, funding.
Yeah. What is the background on why they decided to go with the stucco over the brick? I'm just curious about that.
Kind of interesting, and it's pretty clear. The brick they were firing on site, they had brick clamps there where they were actually manufacturing it. And one of Rosalie's sons talks about it in some of his memoirs, where the lawn is all dug up. They're trying to get the marine clay to fire it up. Two things, really. The first thing, the quality of the brick wasn't that great. And it's still today, there's a lot of work that has to go on and to replace brick that have sugared, meaning they fell apart and turned to dust. They didn't have a lot of high temperatures back then. But the other thing is, it's a very European finish. That cream colored stucco on there. If you go to, you fly over any place in Europe, especially once you get to the continent, whether you get to Belgium, France, south of France, even some places in Germany, and you've got that kind of stucco going on the side. So that's a pretty typical thing. The other thing that I think that made it different was they used cedar shingles, but the cedar shingles were dipped in like a barn red paint, and it kind of gives it the effect of terracotta, which is another thing. It's very common to see those in Europe, and so it was built by a guy from the Low Countries that would have been very familiar to him.
Yeah. So how did your, like, as you kind of grew there did you see your management, how you manage people, your management style, kind of that, did you see that change over the years, mature over the years? You speak a little bit to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I was the chief cook and bottle washer, as you mentioned. I think I'll be lampooned for this, and so don't you guys laugh. I think I cleaned the best bathrooms there.
You have to, right?
I think I did. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to challenge me for that. I think that when you're in a situation like that, you're very appreciative of staff once you're able to get it. Like I mentioned before, I was casting my line out and reeling people in. I would do a lot of programs and people liked it. I got made fun of. I mean, there's some people that took the museum world like really, really seriously. They were the red velvet ropes people. There were a lot of those folks when I came in. And I did a funeral reenactment one time, and a person that you and I know called it Ed's Dead Show. It was, but we did a lot of, it was around Halloween. And we did an Episcopal rite funeral. It was somewhat macabre, but it wasn't on purpose. It was just, this is what they did. And, folks made kind of fun of that, but when they reenacted George Washington's funeral, the first people they came to for the research was, us, because we'd actually done one, right? Yeah. And then that actually opened up some doors in a couple different ways. There was a funeral parlor. Not that I want to get into this kind of stuff, because if you know me, I'm not this way. There's a funeral parlor that was here, and it was started before the Civil War in the antebellum period. And they reached out to us and said, "Hey, we got some papers you might be interested in." And we found out that Rosalie and George's son, Charles Benedict, who founded the University of Maryland, actually used the company to build caskets for his slaves that had passed. So there's always this nexus. I mean, it might be far-fetched. It might sound far-fetched, but I think, you need to break new ground. There's always some thread, believe it or not. You got to keep your mind open, throw it out there, and have the courage, I think, of, your convictions on some of these programs.
Yeah. Well, and you're bringing more people into the fold. The folks that that increased programming just shows it allows more people to be engaged, I think.
Absolutely. And that ran its course for 3 years. And then we did something else. We did some Edgar Allan Poe things, and, just because there's adults always want to do things. They remember when they were kids, they always wanted to, they still want to do things at Halloween. And so, we would do things like that, or we do a costume ball, but that was for a couple of years, but nothing's far-fetched. I mean, I think that from my entrepreneurial and management background, as far as what you asked me about my style, I'm a servant leader. Once I get people in, how can I help you do your job? I want people to grow. I mentored a lot of folks. There's a young woman who's over in Ireland right now getting her master's degree, and she kind of came to Maryland, before she left from Maryland. She came to Riversdale, and we just gave her a lot of responsibility and said, here's what we want you to do. And, some people can do it, some people can't. We fostered a ridiculously collaborative environment. I'm not heavy-handed in my management style at all. I direct, and we would throw spaghetti at the wall, rigatoni at the wall, orzo. It didn't matter. Anything that we would do. Some worked, some didn't, and we didn't get down if something didn't attract. But there were things that were like, we had I think the longest running War of 1812 reenactment, at least around here. Maybe I can't think of anybody that would do it more. Maybe there's a couple of people a couple of places in Baltimore, but we had a Battle of Bladensburg reenactment and encampment, and so and that helped us, because when we had the 200th anniversary in 2014 of the War of 1812, we were already in position. And so we were a big part of, Battle of Bladensburg and the burning of Washington, and, work with National Park Service and everything in the state. It was pretty fantastic.
Yeah. The retiring justice heard the quote about, don't worry about credit, because and spread the wealth in terms of what people are doing. Don't worry about credit, because if it all goes well, there'll be enough credit to go around. And if it goes bad, then you don't want the credit anyway. But
it's true.
Yeah.
It's
so
true.
Yeah. So you said 1994 you started?
Yeah, I started in 1994,
Okay.
right before that county tricentennial in 96. And I had very little time to get ready for what would come. It was just an amazing thing. We went from no visitors to, 15, 20,000 a year. I mean, just like at the drop of a hat, and that was a lot. So we started adding, I get like maybe 2 weekend managers, and then, I put in, requests to get a formalized part-time staff person, and that turned into more positions. And I worked with the Riversdale Historical Society to hire a curator, because we really couldn't afford that with park and planning. But the Historical Society had their own collections, which is a very unique thing. I mean, we had collections for park and planning, the government agency, but Riversdale Historical Society, the 501c3, had their own as well. So, we had a couple of curators that came in and go, that does not compute, Will Robinson. I can't do 2. They didn't last, but the ones that could actually, digest that were running 2 separate collections, and it really worked. I mean, I would do the preservation work on the house, and then I would let them take advantage of some of the things that would become available, whether it was an auction or whatever. And we had a really great guide for furnishings because of a probate inventory that was available to us after Rosalie died and after George died. So we have these overlaying bits of information. They had a particular type of credenza or whatever. The other thing that was kind of interesting is the Steer family were directly related to Peter Paul Rubens, the painter, and they had a fabulous collection of paintings, like 60 old master paintings in that place. It was really, really neat.
every place is looking right for the stars to align, the soup to come together, where that snowball starts to roll and you get, wow, this place is moving now. I mean, you talked quite a bit about how to get that recipe quite right. At what year was it? Year 1, 2, 3, 5 years in, did you feel like, all right, wow, there's this tipping point? Can you look back and see a definitive time when, maybe not a day, but a definitive set of months or a year where you thought, wow, we've shifted, something has shifted, the stars are aligning?
Well, I mean, I walked in the door and they had gotten nothing but pushback from, as mentioned, 3 museum folks who were trained in museums. I came from a different perspective. I was a consumer of museums. I know what I liked, but that was not necessarily my training. I was in preservation. So that's the structure. But when I came in and I sat down with them, and I have a background in management, I used to work in the food service industry where, you learn how to multitask really fast, right? It's all about that. I said, well, how can I help you? I'm a servant leader. How can I help you? You've been here since the 1960s. There were housewives and retirees. You've looked for this. What do you want to do? We got a whole 12-month slate of things that we have to do. I mean, just, a calendar. What would you, and that was initial, so there was a lot of energy, and they were really happy. I wasn't pushing back. One of the museum directors that came in before me, and she only lasted a couple months, got really too technical, and she was like, okay, we're going to sit down and have a meeting. They come to the meeting. So let's go through a few museum things first. But before we do that, describe what this bottle is to you. And tell me about its finish and what it does, and what's that mean to you? It's like some type of Rorschach test.
Yeah.
These guys are like losing their minds.
Yeah. Small potatoes.
They're like, we've been here since 1967, Chickie. That's just not going to work. And they made it so impossible for her to stay that she went running out like into the Amityville Horror. Get out. They got out. That was not my approach. My approach was, look, I want to come in. I want to have fun. First of all, I think that you have to like what you do. You just absolutely have to like what you do. If you don't like what you do in your career, get out. Life is way too short to get stuck in a nasty job. And so, for me, that was my approach. And there was a lot of joie de vivre. I always felt lucky, like I was over there and I could make friends. There were a few people in that historical study told me afterwards, when I left there. About a year ago, we didn't think you were going to last 2 weeks with this crowd because they were rough. But we made it fun. We made it compelling. I mean, it's like, it's really simple, Jason. When you go buy something for somebody, a gift, there's this old saying that, I kind of go by, and it's like, if you buy something you'd like for yourself, generally somebody else is going to like it too. And so my programming kind of reflected that. We started doing jazz concerts on the lawn, making it relative to the community. It was a place for folks to come like every Wednesday. I was able to get food trucks out there, or a restaurant. And so people could just come with their families on the lawn, listen to jazz, let the kids run in a safe, enclosed environment, get food. They didn't have to cook. So it made it really relative and relevant. Yeah. I mean, the thing is the mansion was a background. It had nothing to do with early 19th century federal history, but it had to do with using that environment, using it as a backdrop, and bringing people in. Really simple formula.
I forget who I was talking with on one of these interviews, and we talked about the mission police. And I suspect the mission police didn't come to those events and start arresting people because it wasn't exactly tied to the mission.
No, I mean, I think you have to think way out of the box, because in the end, fairly or unfairly, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I think I've been relatively successful.
Yeah.
You're tied to your attendance, right? People are going to say, well, you're getting the bang for the buck, especially in a government agency where you're being paid a lot by the taxpayers. Sure, I was raising a lot of money. I built a visitor center over there. We did an enclosure. I have interpretive gardens. I mean, we did a lot of work with private money. I mean, a couple $1 million worth of private money, probably more if you look back at it. But, I mean, I don't think you could be tied to some of that. I think those are great exercises to try and get people on the same page, but you have to be able to reorient yourself. If you look at the American automobile industry, they had a real decline to 70s, 80s, 90s and everything. We were building really nasty products. They weren't able to change production. They weren't able to change their designs quickly. And we got outmaneuvered by the Asians and the Europeans because they identified a market and were able to channel their efforts towards exploiting that market. And I don't think we do that too much in museums. I think we're very rigid. Like you said, whether it's the Red Velvet Ropes crowd or the Mission Police, whatever, I don't think you can stand on ceremony. I was still at Riversdale when the COVID epidemic happened, and I had a really interesting staff who wanted to work, and we came up with an idea. Samantha Ferris, who was one of them, and a gardener, Amy, and we did a victory garden. And so we were growing like crops, and we put them out, and we had herbs and, like green beans or asparagus, whatever time of year it was. This is early 2020. We're like, we can't let you in the house now, but we have to get you in some way. And we would lay things out at nighttime and put up a little booth, and it said, help yourself, enjoy while this whole thing's going on. I'm sure other people did it, but we got picked up by the Maryland, by Preservation Maryland and some other things. And, it got blogged and all, but it was, we were still engaging was what I'm saying. No matter what, we reoriented what we couldn't have tours anymore. We weren't doing rentals, but we wanted to be on the property. And our attendance, even though it wasn't inside the house, maintained, it's level because people were going for walks. They get out of their cubicle, they get out of their house, even during lockdown, they bring their dogs out, they'd walk around. Everybody was socially distanced. They grab stuff from the garden, and it was just a way to engage.
That's terrific. Yeah. So you said last year you made a shift, a pretty big shift, huh? Was that bittersweet, I guess?
Yeah, it was very much so. It was hard for, I'd say, the first 6 months or so. It was kind of emotional. I mean, I built that museum up basically from nothing with, help from my partners and friends groups and really great employees who came and went, part-time employees. I only had one other career person, meaning full-time with benefit. And that was really hard. And there were people that were there. I remember when I was a new kid going to the Historical Society meetings every month, and I was the youngest person. And then it kind of turned out over the years, I started becoming, aging up. I was like, how'd that happen? It's great. And I was always doing preservation there, always tied in with the University of Maryland and, Don Linebaugh and Dennis Pogue when he came over from Mount Vernon. And they're all buddies of mine. And so I was always doing the preservation. I did a stint for 4 years as an assistant division chief, which in my organization, and we have 180 historic resources. We have about 9 accessible open sites. 7 of those are museums, Montpelier, Surratt House, Darnell's Chance, College Park Aviation Museum. And I was managing that and doing, preservation work on that. An opportunity came up to be in this preservation role and work on these sites. And that's pretty much what happened. So I've stepped away from Riversdale. They've got another director over there, Maya Davis. And, I'm staying in my lane, as it were. I mean, we've all been around situations where somebody's had some experience there and wants to tell you how to do certain things. I'm there to help when needed.
Yeah.
I left that I left Riversdale with a really great staff. We were fully loaded. Now it's just a matter of maintaining that,
That's terrific. Yeah. So now, like, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. Again, just supervising how many places and people, and yeah.
Well, the by hook or by crook, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Department of Parks and Recreation, has a substantial investment in the historic properties I just mentioned. We don't know of any other agency like ours, other than the National Park Service, that has as many historic assets.
Yep.
Like I mentioned, College Park Airport, world's oldest continuously operated airport, right? Surratt House, involved with the Mary Surratt, Abraham Lincoln, murder. Very well-known sites across the country. We've made an investment of $25 million over 5 years to do some deferred maintenance and preservation work, which is, like I mentioned, the Golden Gate Bridge scenario, very similar to that. So we're out there putting new roofs on places and looking at the structures, doing work with, diverting water away from some of these places, and because that's always damaging. But it's fun. It's a challenge. It's Zen-like because you're putting things back in order. And we've done it through COVID. I mean, we've done it through the whole pandemic. When COVID hit, there was about a 2-week period where we're kind of trying to feel our way, who's open, who's not open. Interestingly enough, contractors kept working, and we work with contractors on a lot of this stuff. We have some internal carpenters and things like that, but the big jobs were done by external organizations, and we had to keep up. We weren't going to shut down. So my staff, Gina Vaughn and a guy named Brian Carroll, have been working really, really hard on and just continuing. So when people are coming back to work now, we're like, well, we never really stopped.
Yeah, you made it work.
Yeah, you have to. Well, these houses need it. I mean, these museums, these historic structures need it. They don't know anything about COVID. The historic structures, the rain, the sun, the snow, the winds and all, it takes its toll. And if you don't keep up on it, you have a major construction project instead of just a minor maintenance issue.
Yeah. Did you, I know that a lot of our colleagues who are purely in the nonprofit world, I don't know, you might have experienced some of this with, and I don't want to get into too much of the politics, but I know in the nonprofit world, when it was, purely a board, it was difficult for people to juggle what to do, how to handle visitor safety, the protocols, wiping things down, not wiping things down, coming from kind of the government directive, did you find how was that a little bit easier because you just knew what the directives were, or did you still have to do juggling with the friends groups and
Well, that's an interesting question, and one that drove me bonkers when it happened, because I'd created that entrepreneurial zone, over there, building internally when I didn't have funding, making my own funding, kind of doing my own thing. And they let me do it because I was growing it and, bringing a lot of attention to it, whether it was through the Belgian embassy, because it was built by Belgians. So of course, what's a natural relation? Let's reach out to the Belgian embassy. And I became friends with a bunch of ambassadors, and I felt like Forrest Gump sometime going down to, some of these receptions and private dinners and stuff, because we were like-minded.
Yeah.
So I knew what the site could take. I knew that we could come up with a social distancing plan and an opening plan really easily, which we did. And it was in place, and we had dots on the floor, and we had hand cleaning stations and everything else. But okay, we got that done. What we did, though, is we had to wait for our Leviathan, in a good way, organization. It's a large organization, and everything is basically coated with the same green of park and planning, right?
Sure.
Parks and recreation green. And so, a public pool is going to have different opening issues than we would as a small museum. Same thing with like a community center or what have you. So we're ready to go, and we had to wait for the green light from the larger organization to say, okay, you can open. And that was like really, really frustrating, because there were people that were just dying to get out. I mean, no pun intended. They were just dying to get out, go and experience things, work a different part of their brain. You and I are doing a virtual meeting today. And this is one thing I would tell our colleagues for sure. Get away from that. We are the Uncola. People like to have human contact. I'll say it again. They want human contact. Okay. You still have to be mindful. This stuff isn't completely out of the air. But the point is, they can't visit a house and experience the space or a museum through their screens. You can get an approximation of it, but it's nothing like walking through a building with 15-foot ceilings and looking at magnificent and ornate plaster and compo material, looking at it and just pondering that. It's hard to do on a screen. But we were ready to go. We were just waiting, and we're still kind of doing it in fits and starts. We got going again, and then we had Omicron, and you take a few steps back.
Yeah.
I think that the museum over there, because I'm just down the street from it now, it's going to be doing concerts this summer, jazz concerts, and starting to do some things program wise, but they're nowhere near where they used to be. They're probably 20% of what we used to do as far as our exhibits and things go. But that was easy to come up with those. I mean, let's face it, in museum, we're in museum field, we're kind of like Woody Allen anyway. I mean, I would say that one blanket statement that would probably cover us all is we're a bit neurotic, aren't we? Especially when it comes to collections and things. So
Yeah.
we were already kind of there. We're kind of oh, okay, well, our collection, our person wears gloves, you can wear gloves, masks. Sometimes when we clean, we wear masks. Okay, we've got masks. you know
Yep. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, any words of wisdom for people starting out? It could be a kind of a managerial tip or something to keep in mind. Anything like that before we wrap up our conversation?
You have to love what you do. You have to be enthusiastic about what you do. That enthusiasm is contagious. Hire people that are sharp, that share your passion. Passion's so important. Don't get caught up on sheepskin. That only goes so far. If you have a good feeling about someone, and they might not have that master's or PhD, but they've got that kind of gut thing, go with that. I would say always be a great servant leader, help people rise, be a mentor, right? You can't subjugate people and expect them to be creative. You can't do it. It doesn't really work. Think about being in a band. Somebody comes with an idea for a song. The drummer gets a beat going. You play some guitar chords over it, and it becomes a song. It's how the Beatles did it, right? They collaborated. Collaboration is so important. It's so important to communicate that with your staff. Tear down the walls. You can conquer the world. That's what I would say.
Yeah, man. And finally, one thing that people just might not know about you, a hobby, a particular interest that they'll hear and like, I did not know Edward Day was into that. What could be that thing?
Well, let's see. Besides being an avid motorcyclist, I was a heavy metal musician back in the 80s, and that's part of the reason why I know about collaboration. And see, I played the Capitol Center. I played the Kennedy Center. I played a lot
Get out of here. That's awesome.
Deep Purple. I've done a lot of, I had a huge background in the music industry and making it. People don't really know that. They think that I'm some dry person, mild-mannered Clark Kent. And
do you have long hair?
Oh, long and lots of it. Absolutely. I would love to get that back. I look at Mick Jagger and go, how did you make it that many years and just have that, full head of hair?
Well, you're at that point in your career. You could do the sort of, professorial ponytail thing going on there.
That almost happened, Jason, during COVID. I couldn't get to the barber or whatever, the stylist and everything, and it started to grow down. There's some people walking around with some COVID news right now. I picked my car up the other day where I had dropped it off for service, and one of the guys that was there had short hair at the beginning of it. Now he's got a long ponytail, as you mentioned. But, I don't know. He had a full head. He wasn't bald like I was, like I kind of am. That's the other thing. I'm very self-deprecating.
Well, Ed, this has been it's been great. I think folks are going to enjoy hearing your story, and I think and people in the region, not just Maryland, in region in general, are going to feel inspired about what you've done in your career. And again, appreciate your time.
Jason, a pleasure to meet up with you again. You got a new assignment now, right?
Yeah, I'm back down your way. I'm with the Historical Society of Carroll County. Can't believe it. So.
That's an awesome position. I saw it advertised. I think you're just perfect for it. So we'll have to meet up at some point.
I hope so. Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.